We left Aegina the way pilgrims have always left an island, with the saint still close behind us and the sea ahead. The ferry carried us back across the water to the harbour of Athens, and then the road again. A bus, the long inland miles, the light shifting as the hours passed, until the mainland gave way to another island, Evia, and to a small town with a very old name, Prokopi. We came to rest at the guest house beside the shrine, set down our bags, and walked out into the streets while the day was still soft. We had crossed the sea to stand before a man who, in his whole life, was never once allowed to go anywhere at all. He was born around 1690 in the lands we now call Ukraine, and while still young, he became a soldier of the Tsar, Peter the Great. The Greeks remember him by the empire whose uniform he wore. They call him John the Russian. In a campaign against the Turks, his army was broken, and John, with thousands of others, was taken captive, marched to Constantinople, then sold far inland to Prokopion in Cappadocia, into the household of an officer. For a Christian slave, there was a particular cruelty. They beat him, they spat on him, they burned the hair from his head. In the end, they decided where he belonged. He would live in the stable, among the animals. And here the story turns. Because John did not break. When they demanded that he give up his God, he answered simply, "You are masters over my body and my work, but not over my faith. I would sooner die than deny Christ." So he took the stable and made it a church. He swept it clean. He prayed there through the nights, alone in the dark, with the breath of the animals around him. And slowly the men who had tortured him fell silent before him, and began, in their own tongue, to call him the saint. They still tell how once, carried by an angel, a plate of food traveled from that stable all the way to Mecca, to the table of his master, and came home 3 months later, still marked with the family's own sign. The meaning was plain to everyone. The slave in the stable was not alone. He did not live to be old. In the spring of 1730, his strength gave out. On the 27th of May, he sent for a priest. Even this was dangerous. So the priest hid the holy gifts inside a hollowed-out apple and brought them to the stable. And there, among the animals, John received communion for the last time. And then he was gone. The captive was free. The Christians of Prokopion were given leave to bury him. They carried him through the streets the way you carry a bishop, by hand, in candlelight, with the incense rising, Christians and Turks and Armenians together, all of them somehow knowing that an ordinary man had not died. 3.5 years later, the priest who had given him communion saw him in a dream. "My body is whole," the saint told him. "It has not decayed." The priest doubted, until a column of light was seen standing over the grave, like a fire that did not burn. So they opened the earth, and the body lay there exactly as they had set it down, unbroken, and giving off a fragrance that has never left it since. Even fire could not take him. Years later, in a time of war, a man came and threw the relics into the flames, meaning to destroy them. But the soldiers standing by swore that they saw the body move in the fire, as though it were alive, and they fled in terror. The next morning, the Christians found him again among the cold ashes, darkened by the smoke, and still whole and still fragrant. A silent man. He had spoken almost no words in his life. Now his body said everything. For 2 centuries, the people of Cappadocia kept him. The sick came, and the blind, and the broken, Orthodox and Armenian and Turk alike, and they went home healed. His grave became the beating heart of that whole country. Then came 1922 and the great catastrophe. The Greeks of Asia Minor lost everything: their homes, their churches, the graves of their fathers. More than 1 million were dead or vanished, and the rest were driven out for good. But they would not leave him behind. Refugees who had lost their own houses carried the body of the saint out of Asia Minor on their shoulders, down to the coast, onto a ship, across the sea, to this island, Evia. And when at last they found a place to begin again, they gave their new village the name of the town they had been forced to abandon. They called it New Prokopi. They had nothing. It took them years even to raise a church worthy of him. The work was only finished in 1951, but they built it. And around it, in time, they built guest houses for pilgrims and homes for orphans and shelter for the old. Exiles who had lost everything made sure the homeless saint had a home, and that everyone who came after them would have one too. This is the church we had come to. This is where he lies. Inside, the church was full of the smell of beeswax and incense, and there before us was the shrine and the saint within it. We had arrived just as the local priest was beginning to pray. The people standing around him were not visitors, but the ones who live here, who come to him the way you come to family. We stood among them and prayed with them, and for a while there was no difference at all between those who had traveled far and those who had only crossed the street. There was only the saint and the prayer and the quiet. It is hard to say what you feel when you draw close to him. The old people here have a simple word for it: grace, mercy. You come near and the air itself seems to have weight. And they do not speak of him as someone who lived long ago. They speak of him in the present tense, because he has never stopped. They will tell you about a ship caught in a storm in the cold northern seas, its instruments dead, going down, and the captain on his knees, praying not for himself, but for his frightened crew. He prayed all night. By morning the ship lay safe in a harbor it had no way of reaching, and no one could ever explain who had brought her in. They will tell you about a doctor, a man of science, who did not believe, dying of cancer in a hospital in Athens, who in the dark prayed for the first time in his life. A young stranger came into his room and said, "I will take this illness upon myself." When they ran the tests again, the cancer was gone. He wrote afterwards only that he had not believed, but that he had seen the saint and was healed. The saint who was never allowed to leave his stable goes wherever he is called. We bought a few icons in the little shops near the church, something to carry the day home with us. Close by, there is a small chapel kept in memory of Saint Paisios of the Holy Mountain, and there a quiet line had formed. They keep there the belt and the cap of Saint John, and one by one the people came forward, laid them on, stood a moment with their eyes closed, and prayed. There is no theatre in it, only an old, patient trust that what once touched a saint can still carry his blessing, and a willingness to wait your turn for it. Afterwards, we let the town be a town again. We walked. We sat down to dinner, souvlaki, the way it should be eaten, slowly, in the evening air. Later, coffee, and more walking, and the streets going dark around us. And in the morning, before we left, we went back for the liturgy, to stand before him one more time, not as visitors now, but inside the church's own prayer, where he belongs. Then we took the road home. I keep returning to one thing. He spent his whole short life as a slave, in a borrowed country, in a stable that was not his, never free to choose a single road of his own. And here we were, free people who had crossed seas and borders just to be near him. 300 years later, he is still receiving guests. He still answers when he is called, in the cold northern seas, in the hospitals of strangers, at the bedsides of frightened mothers. The world is loud, and it keeps telling us that the strong are the ones who go where they please and take what they want. And then, if you let it, it leads you to a small church on a Greek island, to a body that would not decay and would not burn, and to the oldest and quietest of all its secrets, that the freest man any of them had ever met was the one who owned nothing and went nowhere and would not, for anything in the world, let go of Christ.